better eye level this time.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the VALIRX investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard and will notify you by email when they're ready for you to review. I would like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll. I would now like to hand over to Susan Dilley, CEO, Mark Trahan, Commercial Director, and Dr. Kevin Cox, Non-Executive Director. Good afternoon to you all.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's attending today. We've arranged this presentation so that we can provide information both to current shareholders and to new shareholders. So apologies if some of you have seen some of this before, but we promise there is some new information towards the back, as we're hoping to introduce you to some of our new strategic thinking and how that's evolving as a result of the work that we've done over the past year. So first of all, we have to remind you with this disclaimer that you should do your own research on the company and on all of our products before you consider investing in the company. Please don't take just this presentation as your sole research. So although I appreciate that this disclaimer has far too many words on it for you to read in one go, we will make this presentation available on our website after today, so you can look back at this at your leisure. So that actually applies to all of the information we're providing today, because this presentation will be available. There are some slides that we'll click through quite quickly, and if you find you have questions on those when you look back at a later date, then feel free to email us on our shareholder communication system at questions@VALIRX. So I'd also like to apologise while we're doing this presentation that if we look like we're looking away from the camera, that is because we're looking at a laptop directly in front of us while we're doing the presentation. So we will try and remember to look at the camera, but if at any point you think we're not talking to you, please don't take that personally. So moving on and considering our company strategy as it stands at the moment, this is the company strategy that we introduced last summer when myself and Kevin moved on to the board at VALIRX. We refocused the direction of our research towards earlier, more preclinical stage programs. And in order to do that, we've been sending Mark, who's here today to talk about exactly that, out to universities, to charities, to other early stage biotech companies to look at the landscape of early innovative therapeutic programs that are available in the areas of women's health and oncology, and looking specifically at preclinical stage programs that are either small molecules or synthetic peptide therapeutics that we might be able to bring in-house into our programs in order to provide development of those through to the end of preclinical stage, so that we can then find partners, whether that's external funders or industry partners, to fund the clinical trials in the future. So just to be clear, we are focusing on the preclinical development stage and funding preclinical. And we believe, if I move on to the next slide, I think this will draw this together. We believe that we are uniquely positioned to do this, to take programs from universities or early stage biotechs and bring together these three strands. So bringing together our science expertise, because we do have expertise in the company of running clinical trials in these areas. We can bring that clinical experience to bear earlier on in the development stage. So in the preclinical stage, the work is carried out with a view to the end point. So we can run preclinical experiments that are ready for the programs to move into the clinic. We believe we have the commercial experience, and again, in particular with Mark here, being able to draw together the commercial and the finance experience to develop programs in a manner that's appropriate to industry, where Kevin steps in, and to external investors. So we believe that by drawing these three strands together, represented very broadly by the three of us sitting here, that we offer a unique prospect, so that when we go to universities and say, let us help you translate your programs from that early stage science to a a fully fledged clinic-ready program that industry will recognise and want to partner, that we know we are the people who can achieve that. So moving on, where is the pipeline that we have at the moment? So this shows a mixture of mainly what we define as the legacy programs. So our 201, 301 and 401 are the programs that have been in VALIRX for a number of years now. And in particular with 201 and 401, they're programs that we are looking to actively license now because they have had clinical trials run on them. So they are at a slightly later stage than the new programs that we're bringing in. So to briefly summarise these, so that if there are any new shareholders or potential shareholders in the audience, you can understand exactly where we're coming from. VAL201 is a short synthetic peptide that has been developed for the treatment of prostate cancer. So this completed a phase 1/2 clinical trial last year, and those final results from that clinical trial fed out at the end of last year. So our ambition at the moment for this program is to out-license this, to find a partner to carry on the clinical development and to make sure that this program develops in a manner that's appropriate for patient use in the future. VAL401 similarly is listed as a legacy asset that we are currently looking to out-license. This completed a pilot phase 2 clinical trial in end-stage lung cancer a couple of years ago, and we are also looking to out-license that program to a corporate partner in order that it can continue its clinical development and eventually reach market. Finally, for the programs that have been in VALIRX for some time already, the program VAL301, labelled here as for the treatment of endometriosis, is the same active pharmaceutical ingredient as VAL201, so the same synthetic dicapeptide. And this is using the same mechanism of action, but whereas in prostate cancer, it's inhibiting an activity caused by the androgen receptor, in endometriosis, exactly the same activity also prevents activity by the estrogen receptor. So although endometriosis is a non-cancerous condition, it's still characterized by cellular proliferation, that is an overgrowth of cells in an area that you don't want them to be growing in. So this program is at preclinical stage. There are some further experiments to be run in preclinical, and it's also subject to an evaluation agreement with the Japanese company at the moment. So this arrangement with the Japanese company has been ongoing for just over a year now, and we sent them some material just at the beginning of the pandemic, actually. So we had to ensure there was sufficient material there for them to carry out all of the work that they wanted to do. But they've been carrying out further preclinical work to see whether or not it's appropriate for them to adopt into their pipeline in a very similar manner to how we do with our new programs. But alongside this, we've also been carrying out our own work on the peptide, better understanding the biology and the cellular interactions of the peptide, because this impacts our understanding both for endometriosis but also for prostate cancer. And this also leads to our final product that's above the line in this diagram here, and this is BC201, which is our program for the treatment of COVID-19 complications. Now again, one of the key components of this program is the VAL201 peptide, so the synthetic decapeptide. And this is in conjunction with two other biotech companies, Oncolytica and Black Cat Bio. And the program is being run predominantly by Oncolytica. VALIRX is responsible for providing some small quantities of material. So our surplus clinical trial material of the peptide is being supplied into this, but also our expertise and understanding of the peptide. So because we have clinical safety data from the peptide from the prostate cancer trial, this has been able to translate directly across into the virus project to allow them to look at the activity in the reduction of the hyperimmune response and in the reduction of viral uptake into the cell by the peptide. So that program is ongoing. There are experiments going on to make sure that we understand the biology, looking at the 3 areas in which the peptide may impact the virus, the viral replication within the cell, viral uptake into the cell, and the hyperimmune response caused by the rest of the body as a result of the viral infection. Now finally, we have under the orange line here, and this is the news that we put out a week or so ago. We have a new program in under evaluations. This is very exciting for us, as this is one of the big areas that we're developing under the new strategy. So it's good to be able to have a program in again under evaluation. And this is a program that we brought in under an evaluation agreement from a top London university for the development of treatment of triple negative breast cancer. I'm going to have to practice saying that one if we get it through evaluation. So I have a further slide to give greater detail of this. Now, if you look at this presentation in greater detail when we make it available on our website, there are similar slides to this slide for our other programs, which will also be made available as an appendix to the presentation. But this one we've kept in the main presentation just to introduce you to the program, because even established shareholders won't be familiar with this one yet. So there is not a huge amount of detail we can give on this just yet. The university in question is keen that we keep these details so that you can't identify exactly what the program is, because this evaluation is done on the basis of our opinions. It's our science and our commercial opinions and our fit for our pipeline. So it may be that the science is absolutely perfect, and yet we still decide not to go ahead. So the university is keen that we keep that anonymous for now. But we can tell you that the primary area of treatment will be triple negative breast cancer, but the mechanism of action is such that this might be useful for a number of other cancers as well. In particular, the difficult to treat cancers that don't have an obvious flag or an obvious target on the outside of the cell that marks them as a cancer. We believe that the mechanism of action may indicate that this will be useful for a number of those hard to treat cancers. So we brought this in under an evaluation agreement, and what that the next about 9 months looking at this program and funding some early stage preclinical work from our own funds in order to look at whether or not this is appropriate for us. This involves looking at cell line experiments. It involves looking at the immunogenicity of the drug candidate, and it involves looking at synthetic routes and formulations in order to make sure it's a well-rounded, good project for us to take forwards. So we will be able to update on that probably in around 9 months' time at the latest. We will be confirming whether or not that goes ahead. And as our standard structure, if that does go ahead, that will then be licensed into a special purpose vehicle, a subsidiary of VALIRX, which will enable that project to be developed through to clinic ready and partnership ready status. So just very briefly on the background for why we believe VALIRX has a place in the market in this area of taking programs from university. Now, I know we've spoken about this a number of times before, so I'm going to keep this fairly brief. But universities are absolutely the best place for early stage, blue sky thinking, understanding biology, all the bells and whistles experiments that really get to initiate projects, new ways of targeting cancers, new targets, target validation. All of those things are done absolutely brilliantly by academics. However, when industry is looking to look for these early stage programs and to look at which programs to bring forwards, quite often it's difficult for them to recognize exactly where those opportunities are and how they're going to work. And one of the reasons for this is because the academic work is carried out in the academic labs, and it's not necessarily using standard protocols that are recognized by industry. So for us to step in here as a bridge, people quite often refer to the valley of death for drug projects that go from academia to industry and have to cross this valley in some way. And this is referred to in terms of the innovation development and in terms of funding. So for us to be able to provide this bridge, to be able to provide the funding to carry out those preclinical experiments to an industry standard, but we're working closely with the academics to make sure that research is translated effectively from a science perspective is really what we're concentrating on. And that absolutely isn't going to change in our strategy going forwards. So It is part of Mark's job to go out and forge those relationships with universities to make sure they understand what we're doing, why we're the best partner for this, as well as to make sure that we get to see the best programs. We've updated the numbers on this for this presentation. In the last 12 months, we've viewed a huge number of projects. When Mark first looks at these projects, he brings them to me to have a first look at the science, and then we look in greater detail with our scientific advisors and put a shorter list to the scientific advisory board, who then select the best few at each meeting for us to have more detailed conversations with. And as you'll appreciate from the fact that we launched this strategy a year ago, and we've had, this is now our second project under evaluation that we've now brought in, that this is not a quick process. The process of evaluating is one thing, but then the process of negotiating with the universities and the academics to make sure that the arrangement works for everyone is really what takes the time. So, moving on, what we have discovered when we've been out talking to universities and to charities and to biotechs is that there is a wealth of opportunities out there. There's a wealth of projects there that are available to consider for partnering and to start negotiating with universities. But we have found that the majority, and I'm going to say 95%, but perhaps Mark's actually going to round that up to 100%, the majority of those are in oncology. We go out and we introduce ourselves to the universities, and we say that we're a company focusing on oncology and diseases associated with women's health. And by that, we give the example of the endometriosis program, and they sometimes say, oh yes, that's an interesting one, I've heard of that. But there are a whole host of diseases associated with women's health that don't seem to feature on the radars of these lists of academic projects. And whether that's diseases associated with the menopause, or premature menopause, or hot flushes, or even diseases that affect everyone but are predominantly women, such as lupus, which is 90% women, according to recent statistics. It's really trying to understand why that is the case. We can find women's cancers, we can find programs for that. The triple negative breast cancer, again, it's not exclusively women, but it is predominantly women. And the gynecological cancers, again, a perfect example where we can find projects in that overlap. But we really wanted to look at why academics appear to be not developing drugs for diseases associated with women's health. And when we looked at this with a little bit more of a critical mind, actually maybe the answer is more obvious than we first thought. So as you can see from the slide that we presented here, the majority of early phase clinical trials recruit men. Now if we just let that sink in for a moment, it's something that when we've been talking to people about this strategy of making sure we encompass women's health in our pipeline, a lot of people don't seem to have appreciated why this is and why this causes a problem. So actually why it causes a problem is probably the easiest one to answer. And quite simply, the early stage clinical trials are those where a lot of things are learned about the drug, how the drug interacts with the body and how the body interacts with the drug, the dose levels that are required, the immediate possible side effects, any interactions with other drugs that people might be taking. All of those are looked at and big decisions made about how the drug development process is going to happen based on the earliest clinical trials. And for a disease that affects both men and women, the majority of times those first trials will be carried out in men. And the healthy volunteer trials as well, where you first get the idea of pharmacokinetic and drug dosing levels, those will be carried out in men. Now, you have to immediately ask the question of why. And one of the big reasons of why is because of the risk of women, particularly of women of childbearing age, becoming unintentionally pregnant during that clinical trial. Now, this seems like an absolutely obvious risk. If the drug isn't fully tested yet, I mean, we're talking about early phase clinical trials, they will have been tested in preclinical, there will be a number of areas of testing to make sure we understand the biology before they go into the clinical trial. But actually, why would you take the risk of testing a woman in the early trials? And it's that question that appears to be most important. Why would you take that risk? So what we believe is a major driver here is that when academics are first looking at the fact they have a potential drug candidate and how are they going to develop it, there are very well established protocols for testing potential cancer drugs in the clinic, or in the lab, and in the university labs. And that's a good route to go. There's an obvious market need. Everyone knows about cancer. Everybody knows people who have died of cancer. And so everybody knows there is a commercial and a patient need for new cancer drugs. But the areas of diseases of women's health, it's just not quite the same. The models to be used in the labs aren't as well established. There's that early stage risk of how to get it into women at the early stages if you haven't had the ability to carry out all of the reproductive toxicology studies to start with. And are those reproductive toxicology studies enough? So even if you carry out the whole barrage of preclinical experiments, if that goes into the trial, are you still confident? And now there are changes happening in this at the moment. So the regulatory situation is improving. And we believe that the opportunity is now there to enable that to happen. So the regulators are looking more flexibly at applications that involve bringing women in early. So if you can make a justification for why women should be in early trials, because it is a disease of women's health, for example, and there's no point putting an endometriosis drug into men to see whether or not it works. But the fact that you even have to justify this, and the fact that the company knows that you have to justify this and you have to take steps, is off-putting from a commercial perspective. So we want to change that. Oh, that's a very big ambition said in 2 words. But this is where we want to start talking about an evolution of our strategic ambition. So we've always said that we're focused on developing treatments for oncology and women's health, and that hasn't changed at all. We might swap the words over and say women's health and oncology, and we're certainly looking very much in that overlap. But what we want to do is we want to build the capability into VALIRX to enable our programs to be developed in a manner that allows women to be incorporated early on. So this can apply, of course, not just to diseases associated with women's health, but diseases across the board. So that if a condition is affecting men and women equally, that doesn't mean that the treatment will be equally effective in both men and women. Or even when you're looking in women, whether or not premenopausal and postmenopausal women will respond in the same way when the hormonal environment in the body is so different. So what we want to do is we want to build this in early into our drug development process. We want to make sure that the programs that we develop have that good understanding of biology that gives us confidence to take the programs into the clinic and into women at the earliest opportunity. Now, we know that we have some expertise in this area, and we know that we can access the expertise by using contract research organisations, by buying in consultants' time as we need it. But we're also looking at innovative technology platforms that can help us do that. So where we can use innovative technologies to enhance our understanding and provide an enhanced translation of those programs that we're taking from universities, that's really what we want to do. And where the opportunity is there, we would also like to be able to bring those opportunities in-house, so that if we have those technology platforms in-house and we have those capabilities and that expertise in-house, we will be able to use them to enhance our drug development process in a really wholesale manner, to make sure it's part of our culture to develop programs in this way. But we feel that this is also potentially of use to other companies. We're quite ambitious in that way. We don't just want to change what we're doing, we want to change what the industry is doing. So we want to make sure that if we put together technology platforms that enable our drugs to be developed better, we want to offer that opportunity to other companies as well. And by being able to offer this, being able to allow other companies to access our expertise and our capabilities, we think we can help affect a change in that culture in the industry. In addition, of course, it has the advantage that if we're offering this as a service, we've got the opportunity for early revenue to come to us as well. So we have the same strategy as previously, that our in-house program will be partnered through the special purpose vehicle subsidiaries that we intend to set up, and income can flow back through service revenues to those companies. But we also believe we can do the same for the wider industry, that by offering our services, effectively operating as a CRO ourselves, a contract research organisation, that we can bring service revenues back to VALIRX quicker, while also affecting a much needed change in the industry. So I'm going to wrap up there. Hopefully we've triggered lots of questions, and we have a few questions sent in beforehand as well. So thank you to everyone who's done that. The slide deck that will be available on our presentation on our website to show this presentation includes some extra slides, as I detailed, about the other programs, and we look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
So that's great. I mean, just maybe you've spoken now for about 20 minutes or so, just to sort of make one point clear. And Susie said the presentation is going to add something new, and that's that last slide. I think we'd ask people to look at and understand what we're going to be doing differently to what we've been doing previously. So we're still very keen to out-license the legacy products. We still want to develop our pipeline, but it's this strategic ambition, it's the change, I think, that I think we've recognised over the last year in dealing with the universities and understanding where the market needs are. This is the bit that we think we can add something that's unique. And so we're going to be focusing very heavily on that over the next 6 to 12 months. Thank you. That's all I want to do.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So I think...
So we can hand back to
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So Susan, Mark, Kevin, thank you very much for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company takes a few moments to review the investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. I would also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after today's presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide that feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. So Susan, Mark, Kevin, we have received a number of pre-submitted questions, as you had alluded earlier, from investors, and I wanted to start off the Q&A session with these questions. The first one reads: obviously, it's key for shareholders that the company break the current never-ending cycle of raise, spend, historically continually eroded shareholding value. Would you be able to confirm that the company has a clear focus now on attempting to get at least one product line licensed before yet another capital raise?
Yeah, I think I could probably answer that question. I think I could probably answer it in two parts. So first of all, I think since Susie and Kevin have come onto the board, I'd probably argue that the cycle of raise, spend at ever decreasing values has been kind of knocked on the head. I think if you look at the last capital raise that VALIRX actually undertook was for £1.35 million at the end of July 2020. We haven't done a capital raise since then in any way, shape or form. The only money that has been coming into the business since then has been the exercise of warrants at 13p associated with a placing in early May of 2020. So we've actually gone over a year without doing a capital raise in any sort of form. So I think that we have kind of tried to change that culture and tried to become more sufficient. And I think if you look at the interims that were published earlier this month, you can see that the cash position of the business is still very healthy. We're obviously all working hard at looking to out-license at least one of the legacy assets. I think earlier this year we said that we'd like to be able to do that before the end of the year, and I think that we can safely say that we're still on track to try and do that. So I think that kind of to sum it all up, I think that culture of raise spend has been finished. I think the cash position of the business is strong, and I think that we certainly plan to out-license one of the legacy assets ahead of any further capital raise.
Thanks, Mark. Yep, nothing to add.
Yep, good for me.
Fine.
Thank you
Next
very much.
question.
Regarding a license deal, what do you envisage this might look like? Are we talking a cash consideration up front plus a percentage ongoing royalty?
Shall I take that one?
Yeah, I think that's what
so the licensing deal will be, we imagine, very similar to what you typically expect for a product of this type at this stage. So it will comprise an element of upfront. It will comprise milestones associated with the development program, but also commercialization and ultimately royalties, subject to the drug actually going all the way through to market authorization and successful sales. Given the nature of where we are with the development of particularly 201, which is still really quite at an early stage, and not surprisingly, this to a degree we're back-end loaded. But all of those components we hope will be in the final agreement that we come to.
Thank you very much indeed. The next one asks, your installed running cost is in the region of £800,000 a year. Do you see this remaining the same or significantly increasing should you secure a license deal?
You can tell one?
Yeah, that's fine. That looks like my turn. So I think we've been very open about our cash flow for the last year. I'm not sure there are many AIM companies who have actually published their bank account via RNS every quarter for most of the last year. So I'm not sure the 800,000 is exactly correct, but it's not a bad ballpark. Now, in terms of whether or not it's going to remain the same or significantly increase, I think that's actually slightly independent of the licensing deal question, because we are intending to enter a phase of high growth. We intend, as you've just seen from our presentation, to be quite ambitious about what we can achieve on the science side and the development of future programs. So our running cost, our standard cost for working capital of running those initial programs, those evaluations, and then bringing in to run in the SPVs will increase as more come in. We will probably have to look at increasing the core team that's working on those to make sure that we have enough bandwidth to take programs on, evaluate them, as well as negotiate the licensing of the legacy programs. So I think we are going to enter a period of growth. However, we have changed the culture of spending in the company. As Mark's already said, this wasn't just a case of slashing a few costs here and there. We've changed the culture, the culture of understanding exactly what we're spending on what and keeping a close eye on that and making sure every penny is accounted for will carry on. And although the cost is going to vary according to the programs and the individual programs' needs, we believe that we can keep that under a tight rein and make sure it's appropriate to the development that's being carried out.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Susie, the board is an area of very intense focus for the board, and we obviously keep Susie under control and regularly review where we are on the cash position. So we do not intend to suddenly sort of open up the floodgates and be profligate. We'll be very efficient with the capital that comes in.
Thank you very much. Are you predominantly focusing attention on the seeking projects in the easier and quicker to license fields, or do you have any plans to mix in some of the more challenging cancer fields?
No, I think this was a really interesting question. I'm not even going to give the others the opportunity to volunteer for this one. This is a question I came in and immediately flagged for my attention, because it speaks back to exactly those issues that I spoke about earlier, that when we go to universities, we can only respond to what they have and what they present to us. And we quite often find that academics have had opportunities to develop programs in those big name areas, whether or not that's through charity funding or just through grant funding through the research councils. The money that they can get hold of is more often for the big name cancers. But that doesn't mean that those are the only cancers that get attention. And obviously there are specialist groups working on rarer diseases, and there are pros and cons of both sides. And in fact, if you take a disease, whether it's oncology or women's health, that has a fairly limited number of sufferers, then you can apply for something called orphan status. And this is a regulatory status that allows you to take a different regulatory pathway to starting those clinical trials in the first place, but also to eventual market authorization and use in patients at the end of those clinical trials. It allows more scope for extension of patents, so it gives a better commercial landscape. and it gives better access to those patients and being able to recruit those patients, not least because there are usually less researchers working in that area, so there's less competition for those patients. So it's very much, there are advantages to the big name diseases, and certainly when it's at the academic stage, being able to get the money. But we will always be looking, when we bring a program into evaluation, and what other cancers it can be used for, or even what other conditions it can be used for. And we mustn't forget that our endometriosis program was launched from our prostate cancer program. So it's not necessarily even that the drug has to stay in cancer just because that's what we brought it in for. So I think I highlighted on our triple negative breast cancer evaluation program that we will be looking at other difficult to treat cancers for use with that particular drug candidate. And that's going to be very exciting for us, looking to see whether or not there are other areas that the academic just haven't had the opportunity to look into. So in answer to the question in a one-word way, no, we're certainly not going to limit it just to the big name cancers. We are looking across the board at everything we possibly can to make sure, again, if we understand the science, we can understand what that science can be used for.
I think that's a great answer, Susie. And ultimately, it's going to be determined by, is there a real clinical need? Is there a real commercial opportunity? And do we believe in the science? And I think those are the fundamental questions we'll be asking in assessing all the projects that go through our pipeline. So it really, it's really the combination of factors that ultimately we will select something to take forward.
Thank you very much for that. This question was from poster known as Stumbler on the LSE board, who asks, are quantities still being sent to Japan for testing by the unknown company?
Thank you, Stumbler. Stumbler did actually send that to me directly by email as well, so I'm going to be very careful not to use his real name. So I think we probably answered this in the main presentation as well anyway, but the company that is in Japan that's carrying out some of this preclinical testing on BAR301 for the use in endometriosis, they're carrying out an evaluation that's very similar to the evaluations that we carry out on programs that come into us. We were aware when we sent the first batch of the peptide over to them that we were right at the beginning of the pandemic. The lockdowns were just starting to happen, so we made sure we put a little bit extra in before we posted it. So in terms of the direct answer, we said one package. That one package has not yet expired, and we made sure there would be plenty in there. We are carrying out work on the program ourselves as well, and we are sharing the data that we generate with them, just as they have shared data with us, and we have provided feedback and input on their protocols. So it's very much a two-way street. We keep open communication with them, but actually, no, we haven't sent any further peptide out to them just yet.
It's also probably worth recognising that endometriosis is a difficult disease. And there are very limited models, good models, that can be used to help to understand the disease. I think this is in part why we've begun to recognise and to wake up to the fact that there are opportunities here for companies that begin to address these issues, whether these models are preclinical or in human systems or whatever. And so I think that it's been really helpful actually having this dialogue and over this last year to understand how we can, I guess, add more capability to continue to enhance the development of treatments for diseases like this, or treatments for diseases like this. So that's really sort of in a part of what's led to our evolution strategy towards, I guess, increasing internal capability much more so.
It's also probably worth mentioning that just because we've got this evaluation agreement with this one Japanese farmer, it doesn't actually preclude us from negotiating and speaking to other farmers as well. We have had numerous other calls from inbound interested parties asking about the program and wanting to be kept in touch. So
yes, from both Japan and Europe, in fact.
Exactly. So although we do have this evaluation agreement with this one Japanese company, that it doesn't preclude us from speaking and working with others.
Thank you very much. The next question reads, can you update us please regarding which project is likely to license first?
Yeah, so I think this is part of a longer question. I'm going to spoil the surprise there, because I know this question was shared more broadly anyway, talking about specifically about the out licensing of legacy programs. Now, We'll be entirely upfront about this. In any process of out licensing, it's a negotiation. The timing isn't entirely under our control. But the VALIRX program finished its clinical trial last year, and we were very keen to make sure that potential partners had those results as they were hot off the press. And really, our focus has been predominantly on introducing the VALIRX program and the new results to as many people as possible this year, in order to make sure that we could select the right team, the right partners in order to take this program forwards, to find somebody who truly understands the science and understands exactly what needs to be done to this program to develop it. Now, that's not to say that we've neglected the others. We always have an eye on the entire of our pipeline, and we have more recently turned our focus again towards VAL401. We feel VAL201 is in a position now where we are comfortable with the stage of negotiation, and we've been able to divert more of our focus onto VAL401. So that's not to say that we necessarily believe in any particular order, because it is out of our control. However, we have focused the majority of our early attention this year onto the out-licensing of VAL201. Is that a fair summary, Kevin?
Yes, that's right. I think that answers the question, which is a very long question.
Unfortunately, it was a very long answer as well, so apologies if that came across a bit political, but it's out of our control, but we have been focusing primarily on 201 first this year.
Thank you very much. The next question reads, the extension to the collaboration agreement with Physiomix in February 2021 included the offer to Physiomix of a seat on the VALIRX Scientific Advisory Board. Was this offer accepted? And if so, how many SAB meetings has the Physiomix representative attended to date?
Yeah, so I'll cover that one. We're very fortunate that the offer of the seat on the VALIRX SAB board was accepted by a representative at Physiomix. These meetings are held quarterly and are kind of where the great scientific minds of VALIRX get together and evaluate the projects that we've come across in the previous 3 months. And I can confirm that alongside the other academics and industry professionals, that the Physiomix representative has been at both of the SAB meetings and played a very active role in helping us to evaluate new projects coming in.
And I should add to that, whilst we're talking about the SAB, we should acknowledge the fact that we've got some really very experienced people sitting on the SAB who have made a really important contribution to our assessment of the technologies and selection of the ones we take forward. And I think, interestingly, they've also quite often been able to feed back to the universities about how they can improve their own internal activities to have greater success in taking a drug through to the next stage. So we're very lucky in having some excellent representatives on that scientific advisory board.
And I would just expand on that still further and say that it's not just the quarterly meetings where they interact either. All of the members and the Physiomix representative included in this take an active communication role in the projects directly with the universities and with us, feeding back information when we see new data from the universities, and share that. They will help with the interpretation as well as volunteering what they can do in the future to look at it.
We even have SAB members visiting universities when they're on holiday, which we've had in the last couple of weeks for a program that we were interested in.
Yes, it's been a really positive experience actually, being able to get this group together in order to look at the science.
Okay.
Great, thank you. The next question, AstraZeneca confirmed success in their phase 3 trials, and data released from the clinical trial for its Lynparza tablet showed a statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvement in the survival of men suffering from prostate cancer. As a result, has this now rendered VAL201 as unlikely to secure a license deal, and have we missed the boat?
So, Kevin, are you volunteering for that or for me?
You start and I'll back you up.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I know we saw this news from AstraZeneca last week, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's fantastic news for the patients. It's fantastic news for the industry, because it shows how drugs are coming through, how drugs are being developed and making a meaningful impact on patients' lives. Does it mean we've missed the boat? Not in the slightest. if anything, when these items of news come out about big companies hitting the big name cancers, we celebrate it completely, because it shows us which companies are interested in which cancers. It shows that the companies are still interested in those cancers. And the amount of times people say, oh no, that cancer, that's solved. And you just want to turn around to those patients and ask whether or not they would like to hear that they had that cancer because it's solved and it's not a problem anymore. As long as people are still dying of these cancers, there is still room for improvement in the treatments. There is still room for more treatments. And the fact that big name companies are carrying out their drug programs on that shows that there is scope for partnership with those companies, and that there is still a commercial need and a market. Kevin, you want
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, this drug is a combination drug anyway. We still haven't fully read out the data, but it looks very promising indeed, and that's great for patients. But I think we all know that not all patients respond to all drugs, and so there's an absolute need to have more than one treatment for any particular disease. And so it simply demonstrates there's an opportunity to continue to improve treatment for this horrible condition. So we're very encouraged and very enthused by the whole thing, and it absolutely no way impacts what we can do with our particular product. Okay, that's done that one.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. This one is the last of the pre-submitted questions. What are your future plans for PR? We need to see a further step improvement in communications in order to attract new shareholder interest and support existing shareholders.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to volunteer to take. And again, before you have the opportunity to step in, so there's a number of answers to these questions. So first of all, everyone will have seen the news recently that we've appointed Senkos as our broker. Now they will be helping with our communication strategy, and they will certainly be helping to introduce us to new investors and new types of investor. So we're very excited by that. But actually, looking at the suggestion of a step improvement in communications, that is something that we're very keen to do. And everyone knows that we enjoy shareholder communications, that we actively encourage shareholders to communicate with us so that we know whether or not our messaging is working, whether or not it's getting to the people who matter, and whether or not people understand what we're saying and understand the purpose behind the company. So all of that is absolutely invaluable. But I'd like to make one further comment on this. So I noted earlier that our new evaluation agreement for the triple negative breast cancer drug candidate was a good example of how our strategy is now being implemented. Now, we believe that the next stage in our strategy being implemented will be the out-licensing of the legacy programs. And when we achieve that, we will be able to shout it from the rooftops that we have announced our strategy and we have implemented our strategy and that we are performing. At that stage, the PR will be ramped up, hopefully to the expectations and the approval of all shareholders. Because until that point, what we're saying is great on paper. The new strategy is great on paper. The strategic ambition is great on paper, but we need to deliver on it. And until we can deliver on it, any PR that we give is a beautiful strategy on paper and a business term, and we need to deliver, and then we need to shout about it.
I can't really add very much to that, Susie, other than to say that I think our objective over the last year or so has been to really just talk about the things that are meaningful for the company and demonstrate a real movement and transition towards the implementation of the strategy. So rather than just comment for comment's sake, we'd like to say things which are meaningful and impactful. And we hope that over this next period there will be a number of things which we can communicate as effectively as possible. It's fair to say there's always room for improvements, and if people have got ideas of how we can continue to improve what we do, we very much want to hear them. We also need to recognise, I think, that there are different types of people that want to hear our messaging. And so we have to open up all those channels to all the investors and indeed the stakeholders to be as effective as possible. So we hope to continue to improve and maintain the progress that we've achieved so far.
I think that's a very good point, actually, Kevin, that I think everybody, when they're considering what they're reading, instinctively considers it from their own perspective. So you guys, who I hope are there in the audience today, because we can't see you, are most likely private investors or retail investors. But this video will be available to anyone who wants to see it. So that could be potential industry partners, that could be academics at universities who have spoken to, taking a look at whether or not we're respectable people to do science with, and we have to consider all of the people who could be watching. So it's actually a really careful balance to get that right between making sure that everybody hears what they want to hear, but the best way of doing that is to be as transparent as possible and make sure you see exactly what we're doing in the most truthful way possible, so that people see reality. The academic, we're not just giving a polished production for we're going to spend all this money on the science, so they feel encouraged, while also saying to individual investors, don't worry, we're looking after the pennies, because it's the two have to marry together. So we have to take that centre of line if we're doing proportionate spending to make sure the science is achieved. And it's that balance that I think is really important, and the awareness from the audience that there are other areas of the audience.
Yep. Okay. Yep. I think we're good with that one.
Suzanne, Mark, Kevin, thank you very much for those. However, investors have submitted a number of questions during the presentation today, and I wanted to hand back to you to respond to those where it is appropriate for you to do so. Could I ask that you please read out the question and say who is it from?
Sure. So I'll do the reading out.
I know Kevin put his glasses
on. Yeah, I put my glasses on to see what I'm reading. So first we have a question for, I'm not sure this is coming exactly in the right order, but I'm going to go this order anyway. So we have a question from Chris R. The question is, how are you dealing with the challenges faced by academics during the commercialization process?
So I think the phrase commercialization process could mean a couple of things. It can mean the translation of academic research into the industry setting. So that's exactly what we're trying to help them with. But commercialization can also mean right at the end of the development process, where the drug actually moves from clinical testing onto the market. Now that second one, I'm not going to say doesn't concern us, perhaps that's the wrong phrase, but it isn't an area that we're focused on, because that's beyond our stage of when we're going to be working on the drug. We'll have handed that over to a commercialization partner at that stage. But that process of taking the drug candidate from the academics lab into the industrial lab, that's that stage of commercialization. We are keen to work with the academics as much as possible in order to ensure that history of the science, that science knowledge that's built up around the drug candidate is transferred to the SPV, the special purpose subsidiary that we set up in order to house that drug candidate. So we interact with them as much as possible. We explain to them exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it. We try to involve them in as many of the meetings, whether that's with patent agents or with contract research organisations who are going to be carrying out the work, and just make sure they understand what's going on and that they're comfortable with the process. Because although we can do it without them, I'd rather not do it without them. I'm not going to go so far as to say we can't do it without them. But it's not far off that. You need that history, you need that understanding, you need to know where a drug has come from in order to develop it effectively.
I think it's often commented that the UK is not particularly good at translating innovation out of universities and into a commercial environment. What we found, and actually throughout my career, I found actually quite often that the academic is the one who's absolutely very keen to get it out there and get some impact from it, to actually get it commercialized. And when we found that all the way through the last 12 months, the academics themselves really want to work closely with us. What we find is the most challenging bit is the system in which we operate, and that's the bit which can actually create delays and sort of inability to progress. Yeah, it's a bottleneck. That's right. The academics themselves are really keen to take it forward, and I think we think that's very encouraging. And so wherever possible, as Susie says, we want to embrace the academic and bring them into whatever system we set up to be able to develop their baby, their technology. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's very much.
So hopefully that has answered the question. Now we have another question from David T. I brought into VALIRX consequent to the promising prostate trial results, but that was some time ago. What's happened since, i.e. why no positive uptake or move forward on that? And David's given his full name, which I'll hold back. I guess we'd like to think, David, we've tried to address your question already in what we've said so far. Hopefully we've made it clear. If there's anything that is unclear, you can let us know afterwards. But I think we we have continued to focus very heavily on the out licensing process.
And I think just to highlight that it is only a year ago, less than a year ago, that the full trial results were available. There was a lot of speculation earlier than that about what the trial results were going to be. So possibly people felt that they knew the results before they came out. But actually, until the trial was formally closed, and the results formally analysed and entered into the database, that process couldn't begin of the post-trial activities.
Yeah. Okay, hopefully we've covered that one. Another question here from Sparus C. Can you explain to us Senkos's involvement? So, Mark.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's probably one for me. So we've obviously recently appointed Senkos as our broker. What we want to do as VALIRX as a company is we, as Susie spoke about earlier, is that we are planning on becoming a growth company in a very interesting area of women's health, and we felt that Senkos were the best partners to help us grow in that area. That we feel that they have probably the best access to it and relationships with institutional investors, which is ultimately the type of new investor that we are looking to target and become attractive to. So certainly they're going to help us with kind of marketing to the stock market, which will obviously hopefully benefit shareholders like yourself who obviously own shares, but also help us with the branding and the marketing of the story itself. So they are going to be playing a very active part in the growth of the business over the next few years.
I think I would actually add that they've been really useful to date. I think we've had several really valuable conversations with them, because they understand business, they understand science, they understand the market, and it's the combination of skills that they can offer just provides us with another group of people who we can go to external to the company, who can provide us with strategic advice, who we can bounce ideas off, and we can really rationalise things through with. And in exactly the same way as the scientific advisory board helps us to look through the science and make sure we're not missing anything or seeing anything incorrectly, Senkos are providing that from that perspective, that they can see the company from an external viewpoint and really help us to develop into that high growth company that we're aiming for.
They also really bought into us refocusing into women's health. I think they see that is a massive gap in the listed market space, that there isn't really a way of playing a women's health company on AIM, and they think that it is an area that is crying out, or that the investors are crying out for a way of accessing that.
Yeah, I think that's great answers. I think that pretty much answers the question. They're certainly keeping us on our toes anyway. So I'm going to wrap up here. Actually, I think we've sort of spoken long enough. We have one final question from Porky. I think Porky will be well known to many, and I think probably we have addressed this one. Hopefully we have. The question is: are there any license offers that you are looking likely to go with? And I think we've probably given enough pointers through the presentation of where we stand on that. So rather than answering specifically, I think if you reflect on what we said through the whole presentation, hopefully you'll have a much better idea of where we stand in a number of areas at this point in time. So from our perspective now, I think we're going to stop here. If there are any other questions coming through, as said by the Investor Meet company, we'll address them afterwards. But I'll hand back to them, or hand over to Susie to sort of wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's fine. Or I would like to say as a wrap up is really to thank everyone for attending today. We are entering a period where we hope that the cultural changes we've made in the company are going to bear fruit. We are developing our new strategic ambitions to fit into that women's health arena and to fit into the high growth companies arena. So we will be holding meetings which allow shareholders to communicate with us on a regular basis, hopefully. We would like your feedback as well on what works, what you'd like to see more of, and whether or not we've managed to talk to you in a way that helps you to understand the company, because we can only get better from receiving. And it's that communication that I think is very important. So thank you all very much, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Susan, Mark, Kevin, thank you very much indeed for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you will now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that management can better understand your views and expectation. This will only take a few moments to complete, and it's greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management of VALIRX PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. This now concludes today's session.
Thank you.
Thank you.